Picture this. February 16th, 1922. The roof of the world. A frozen mountain trail cuts through the Himalayan borderlands of eastern Tibet, and a lone figure moves along it. A giant of a man, 6 feet 4 inches tall, 270 pounds, reduced now to a gaunt shadow of what he once was. He has 3 Tibetan companions. He has 19 years of blood, prayer, and sacrifice behind him. The Dalai Lama himself has written to invite him to Lhasa, the forbidden city, sealed against the Christian gospel for centuries. And the door is finally open. He is 6 miles from Batang. He rounds a curve in the road. 20 bandits step out from the rocks. The first shot hits him. The man who had survived kidnapping, civil war, smallpox epidemics, and 71 days of mountain captivity goes down on a Himalayan trail. Not at the gates of Lhasa, not at the summit of his dream, but on the road toward it, leaving behind a widow, 2 daughters who would never see their father again, and a son who would grow up without him. And yet, what happens next will convince you that this man did not lose. He multiplied. His name was Dr. Albert Leroy Shelton. He was a Kansas farm boy with $9.25 to his name. He became the Prince of Tibetan Missionaries, and what he built with a barn door, a scalpel, and a refusal to come home will wreck you in the best possible way. Comment below with, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." If you are ready to lay down your plans, trust God with the outcome even when you cannot see it, and keep moving toward the call no matter what the road costs you. And stay with us until the very end of this story, where we will reveal the 3 hidden spiritual disciplines that kept Albert's fire burning for 19 years on the most dangerous mission field on earth, which will enable you to run with endurance the race that God has specifically set before you. Albert Leroy Shelton was born in Indianapolis on June 9, 1875, but the city did not make him. The prairie did. His father, Joseph Oscar Shelton, was a carpenter by trade. His mother, Emma Rosabelle, kept the home. When Albert was 5, Joseph loaded the family west onto the open plains of Kansas. And there, in the vastness of that wind-scoured land, God began building a man for a mission field that did not yet have a name. As soon as Albert was old enough to guide the oxen, he made an 8-mile trip every day to the springs. Ox-drawn barrels, rattlesnake country, coyotes in the hills. He killed snakes with his ox whip. He drove off coyotes with his rifle. He hauled the water home. He did it again the next day. He did not know yet that God was building into a Kansas farm boy the exact discipline a Tibetan valley would one day need. He grew to 6 feet 4 inches and weighed 270 pounds, the kind of man who filled a doorway. And yet, what God would do with that frame was not domination, it was tenderness. This giant would one day kneel in Tibetan mud to dress a leper's wounds. At 15, sitting around a campfire near the dugout cave where the boys gathered, Albert read the story of Ben-Hur. Something ignited. A call. He dreamed of being a missionary. To India, he thought. At 15, you aim at the dream you can see. God aims at the one he has already chosen. He arrived at Kansas State Normal College in 1895 with $9.25 in his pocket. He was rough-looking, poorly dressed, a janitor and newspaper carrier in a school full of high collars and silken skirts. The stylish students drew aside. They refused to notice him, but the mathematics teacher saw what they missed. Soon the same students who had scorned the farm boy were being sent to him for tutoring, because he was leading every class. It was there, in those same college halls, that Albert met a fellow student named Flora Flavia Beale. She was sharp, faithful, and entirely unimpressed by the social posturing that had dismissed him. On April 27, 1899, in Parsons, Kansas, Albert and Flora were married. She would not merely support his calling, she would share it. From the beginning, this was 2 people answering the same call together. He worked his way through 4 grueling years of medical school at the University of Kentucky. Flora taught school to fund it. His studies were interrupted by a year of Army service in the Spanish-American War. which he finished and returned from. He graduated a doctor. He was appointed missionary to China by the Foreign Christian Missionary Society of Cincinnati, the FCMS, the mission arm of the Disciples of Christ, and then God redirected him. The FCMS needed someone to accompany Dr. Susanna Carson Reinhardt to the Tibetan border. Susanna was a Canadian medical doctor who had already attempted Tibet once in 1898. Her husband had died on that journey. Her infant child had died. She survived alone and spent 2 years searching for a physician willing to go back. No one would go. Albert and Flora said yes, together. They boarded ship at San Francisco in the fall of 1903, all 3 of them, and sailed for China. He paid with his plan, his appointment, and his comfort. The discipline that answered that cost was not courage. It was surrender. The kind that says, "Wherever you need me, that is where I am going." That is not heroism. That is the first price of the call. On March 15, 1904, Albert, Flora, and Susanna Reinhardt arrived at Tachienlu. Pressed between Himalayan foothills, 8,000 feet above sea level, at the very edge of the known world. What he walked into was the darkest medical situation that can possibly be pictured. The nearest doctor was 7 days' journey away. Every illness was attributed to evil spirits expelled by producing great noise, so the sick were kept awake through the night to drive out demons. Infection had the right of way. Bitter cold and constant fighting produced endless cases of freezing, gangrene, and blood poisoning. No anatomy, no hygiene, no framework for healing that did not begin and end in superstition and fear. Albert Shelton looked at all of that and unpacked his instruments. 2 days after arriving, before he had learned the language or earned a single relationship, a man needed surgery. There was no clinic. There was no operating table. There was a barn door, lifted from its hinges and laid flat. He performed his first Tibetan surgery on that barn door. The call does not wait for the clinic to be built. At Tachienlu, Albert had been joined by J.C. Ogden and his wife, fellow FCMS missionaries who arrived in 1906 and became close partners in ministry. In 1908, with a new physician arriving to hold Tachienlu, Albert, Flora, and the Ogdens pushed 17 days further west into a town called Batang, home to 350 Tibetan families, so remote that 2 months of river and overland travel from Shanghai were needed just to reach it. Before they left, the Foreign Christian Missionary Society wrote asking them to pull back to easier coastal stations. The funding was too difficult. The risk was too great. The 2 men held a mission meeting and wrote back. Their reply, "We will go in but not out, forward but not back." Not a dramatic moment. Not a crisis under fire. Just 2 men writing a letter, choosing the harder road when no one would have blamed them for the easier one. The decision was made before the suffering arrived. That is the only way it can be made. Not long after arriving in Batang, Albert and Flora found a boy living on a street near their home. Half Chinese, half Tibetan, destitute, nameless. They brought him home. They named him Li Guiguang. They raised him as their own son, equal to their daughters. Doris Evangeline, born on the mission field in 1904, and Dorothy Madelon, born in 1907. 3 children at the table, 1 from the street. Remember Li Guiguang. He will preach the sermon that ends this story. In Batang, they built everything from scratch, becoming, as Albert wrote, hewers of wood and drawers of water, brick makers, lumber cutters, tile makers, furniture builders. He carried the first bathtub ever brought into Tibet by mule. He brought an organ on his return from furlough, the first ever in that country, because he believed music could reach where medicine alone could not. Batang was parched and poor. Albert looked at it the way he once looked at a barn door, not as an obstacle, but as a starting point. Under his leadership, the missionaries dug an irrigation canal 5 miles long, routing water from the Xiaoba River through 165 acres of land that had never been irrigated. Apple, apricot, and peach orchards bloomed where cracked earth had been. The people were lifted from poverty, and the locals named the canal the Foreigner Channel, in honor of the men who built it. The boy who hauled water 8 miles across a Kansas prairie had just brought water to an entire Tibetan valley. God does not waste what he builds into a man. In the middle of all that building, a Tibetan leper knelt before Albert in gratitude. He lifted the man to his feet and said, "Get up from there. We do not allow anyone to get down on their knees to us. Before God, one man is no more and no less than another, whether he is a beggar or leper or no matter who he is." That is not a sentiment. That is a theology made visible. Not long after, a Chinese official summoned Albert to treat a man described as a little hurt. He arrived to find him lying on straw and manure, skull crushed, brains oozing from the wound. If the man died under the foreigner's knife, it could end the mission. He prayed with shut teeth. He removed 12 pieces of bone. He closed the wound, went home, and told Flora, "The man will be dead in the morning." The next morning, the man was trying to sit up to thank him. Albert said, "By all the knowledge of medicine I possessed, that man should have been dead this morning. The Lord has healed him." There was no other explanation for it. Then grief came. In 1909, Dr. Zenas Loftus, 28 years old, who had prayed to go to the most difficult field in the world, arrived in Batang to hold the work during Albert's furlough. He arrived in June. By August, he was dead, struck down by typhus and smallpox. Albert wrote, "We were stupefied and asked the eternal question, why? And in an endeavor to find the answer, we got closer to the Lord than we had ever been. In so doing, the Spirit of the Lord was enabled to work and use us as he had never been able to do before." When Loftus' death reached his home church in America, a young doctor named William Hardy immediately volunteered to take his place. Hardy came to Batang. He would be the man, 13 years later, who rode on a borrowed horse to reach the dying Albert on a mountain trail. One death multiplied into reinforcements. That seed bore fruit in 1911 when revival swept China and the fire reached remote Batang. People confessed sins of robbery and murder, tried to quit opium, and asked the missionaries to tear down their idols, which Albert gladly did, replacing them with the Lord's Prayer. Years of unglamorous faithfulness had softened the soil. When the Spirit came, there was harvest waiting. Before we follow Albert into the war zones and the long years toward Lhasa, I want to pause and acknowledge the people who make stories like this possible. The research behind Albert Shelton's story takes weeks of digging through archives and long-forgotten records. Our Cloud of Witnesses members keep this work alive. Hit the Join button on the channel homepage or click the membership link in the description, and stand in the same spirit as the witnesses themselves. One day, Shelton sat with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher and asked him a series of questions. "Who takes care of the orphans?" The teacher replied, "Nobody. Nobody wants them." "Who takes care of the sick?" "Nobody. They are left to die alone." "Who takes care of the old and crippled and helpless?" "No one." Shelton then asked, "Just what, then, is the difference between our religions?" The teacher was forced to admit what he had never publicly said, that Buddhism requires each man to work out his own salvation through accumulated merit, prayer, sacrifice, and self-effort. There is no God who moves toward the broken. There is no one who picks up the orphan from the street. Albert went home that evening to Li Guiguang sitting at his dinner table, the orphan he had pulled off a Batang street, now his son. He did not just preach a different religion. He embodied a different God. Meanwhile, the border wars turned the region into a battlefield. Albert walked into it. He treated the wounded on both sides, Chinese soldiers and Tibetan rebels alike, with the same steady hands and the same unhurried prayer. No faction claimed him. He belonged to the broken. In one of those war zones, a Chinese general was cutting off the limbs of Tibetan rebels and leaving them to bleed. Albert asked permission to treat the wounded. The general was astonished. Why would a foreigner treat the enemy when their own countrymen walked past? Albert replied, "My Lord did the same for me." 5 words. The general eventually became like a brother to the missionary. That is the authority consistent obedience produces. Not a platform, not a position, a life. By 1917, Albert had built a 50-bed hospital, the only medical facility in a region the size of California. In 1918, a smallpox epidemic broke out. No vaccine could reach that far. Albert made his own. On the roof of the world, with no backup, he manufactured the vaccine the people needed from nothing but knowledge, faith, and refusal to quit. Then the impossible happened. For years, Albert had been trying to reach Lhasa, the forbidden city, the seat of the Dalai Lama. Every channel closed. He kept praying. Then a letter came. The Dalai Lama had written, "I know of your work and that you have come a long way to do good. I will put no straw in your way." 19 years. A barn door for an operating table. An orphan raised as a son. A leper lifted off the floor. A 5-mile canal dug by hand. A smallpox vaccine made from scratch. And the most spiritually fortified city in Asia opened its gate for a doctor who charged a nickel for surgery. January 3rd, 1920. Albert is traveling with Flora and their daughters. Doris, now 16, Dorothy, 13, toward the coast on their way to furlough. He rides 50 to 100 yards behind his family's chairs on the road. A soldier suddenly cries out, "Robbers!" fires his gun in the air, and runs. In his own diary, Albert writes, "I looked for the robbers in the direction they were running but could see no one. I grabbed my gun from its scabbard. Seeing we were left alone and the bandits were many, I decided that non-resistance was best, so handed the gun back." He walked toward his family. The shots were flying. And then he noticed one of the bandits. The man had a long black streak across his face. Albert looked at him and laughed. A man being taken at gunpoint by 20 bandits in the Himalayas, and he laughed at the grotesque appearance of his captor. That is not bravado. That is the documented inner life of a man in whom fear had genuinely lost its power. The bandit chief demanded a ransom of $25,000. He let Flora and the girls go. He took Albert, hauled into the mountains, marched ceaselessly from place to place as government troops pursued them. Albert was held for 71 days. His body, that giant's body, built on the Kansas plains, was slowly destroyed. He could not sleep. He could barely eat. He could not stand. He treated the bandits who were sick. He dressed the wounds of the men who were his captors. And gradually they came to regard the missionary not as a prisoner but as a friend. His jailers became his congregation. But inside, in the margins of a book he had been carrying, a novel called Beside the Bonnie Briar Bush, Albert wrote what the triumphant version of this story would never tell you. 8 weeks in, he wrote, "It appears that God did not want me to go inside to Lhasa. It looks as if the end of my work is at hand. I hope to accomplish so much only to wind up in a hole like this. Thy ways, O God, are past all finding out. But help me to say, not my will, but thine be done." That is not the absence of faith. That is faith at its most honest and most costly. Written in pencil on the margins of a novel by a dying man who was doubting whether God still had a plan, and then choosing surrender anyway. Every person watching this has been in that margin, and this discipline is available to you right now. The bandits eventually released him, leaving him by the road where government troops would find him, so emancipated he could not stand. Albert rejoined his family and returned to America. National Geographic published his account. His book appeared. He was now famous. He could have stayed. He had earned it. Instead, he told a friend, "I am aching to get back to Tibet. I'm needed more there than I am here. I can't say that I'm at home here. I know I am there." 17 years on the field, and home was no longer America. The call, fully obeyed, becomes home. He walked back into the fire anyway. Doris and Dorothy were sent to boarding school in America. Albert and Flora's son, Albert Jr., remained in the United States. Flora would return to supervise their education. Albert said goodbye to each of them. He returned to Batang alone at 46 years old. None of them knew it was the last time. He reached Batang just before Christmas, 1921. In February 1922, Albert set out from Batang on the road toward Lhasa, the journey he had waited 19 years to begin. He had 3 Tibetan companions. The Dalai Lama's door was open. The dream was finally within reach. He never arrived. Bandits who had heard of his planned journey lay in wait along the trail, intent on seizing the famous missionary doctor. 20 men had positioned themselves at a mountain pass just 6 miles from Batang. On the afternoon of February 16th, Albert rounded a curve in the road. The bandits opened fire. The first shot hit him. His companions thought he had fired at a rabbit. Then they came around the corner. He was in the road. Before losing consciousness, Albert improvised a tourniquet from his handkerchief and riding whip to slow the bleeding. His Tibetan companions remained with him and kept him as stable as they could until help arrived. Word reached Batang at 4 p.m. Dr. William Hardy, the man who had volunteered 13 years earlier to replace the fallen Zenas Loftis, borrowed a horse and rode hard. He found Albert unconscious, no pulse, severe hemorrhage. He administered morphine, dressed the wounds, and got the stretcher moving. Shot and dying, he was still surrounded by people who loved him. The call that had driven him here had built this, a community willing to ride through the dark to bring him home. And then, on the mountain road leading back to Batang, something happened that will never leave you. More than 50 people came out to meet the stretcher party, possibly 100. They carried pine torches to light the way home. Tibetan people, Chinese people, patients Albert had healed, families he had fed, students he had taught, the leper he had lifted to his feet, the people who had confessed their sins in the 1911 revival and torn idols from their walls, the people who drank from the foreigner channel he had dug. They came out in the night with fire in their hands and lit the road for the dying man to come home. They reached Batang at 10:10 p.m. At 12:48 in the morning of February 17th, 1922, Dr. Albert Leroy Shelton answered the summons to the higher life and passed into eternity. He was 46 years old. He never reached Lhasa. He never saw his daughters again, and the next day, on the day after his death, a funeral service was held in Batang. The man who stood to preach was not a bishop, not a foreign dignitary, not a celebrated colleague. He was Li Guiguang, the orphan boy, the child Albert had found living on a Batang street, who had no name the world wanted to remember. Now a fine Christian man, a gifted evangelist to both Tibetans and Chinese, Li Guiguang stood at his father's grave and preached the gospel to the very people his father had bled for. What Albert had poured into a nameless child on a street corner preached his own funeral. After his death, churches in America raised over $100,000 in his name to fund new mission stations. 28 young people from Enid, Oklahoma alone volunteered to go. By December 1925, the Tibetan Sunday School averaged 170 students. On Christmas Day, 647 of the poor people of Batang were given a meal and a gospel sermon, preached by Li Guiguang. One man, one death, one orphan, one canal, one barn door, one declaration written in the dark, and a 100-fold harvest that is still being counted. You stayed to the end. And as promised, here are the 3 hidden disciplines that kept Albert Shelton's fire burning for 19 years on the most dangerous mission field on earth. First, immediate, unconditional obedience. When Albert arrived in Tachienlu, there was no clinic. He used a barn door. He did not wait for conditions to be right. He obeyed with what was in his hand. The spiritual discipline of acting now, with whatever is available, regardless of readiness. That is the ignition key of the entire life. Second, surrender without comprehension. In A Mountain Captivity, emaciated and doubting, Albert wrote, "Not my will, but thine be done," on the margins of a novel. He did not understand God's plan. He chose God anyway. The discipline of surrender inside the darkness, not after it, is what kept him moving toward the field every time comfort offered him an exit. Third, love as a discipline, not a feeling. Albert lifted a leper off the floor, adopted a street orphan, dug a canal for a poor valley, treated his kidnapper's wounds, and walked into a general's war zone to stitch enemies back together. None of that came from emotion. It came from a decision, repeated daily, to embody the God who moves toward the broken. Love as discipline, chosen, costly, consistent, is what turned a Kansas farm boy into the Prince of Tibet. These disciplines are available to you, right now, today. Albert Shelton was not a superhuman. He was a farm boy who performed surgery on a barn door 2 days after arriving in Tibet. He was the janitor boy students refused to notice. He wrote his doubts in pencil on the margins of a novel, alone. What made the difference was not his greatness. It was his availability. God is not searching for the gifted. He seeks the one who writes, "Not my will, but thine," in the dark, and means it, and uses a barn door when there is no clinic. Comment below with, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done," to declare that when the dream is redirected, when the road is costly, and when the outcome is hidden from you, you will choose surrender over safety and trust Him with what you cannot see. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, like and subscribe to Cloud of Witnesses for more life-changing stories of faith that will equip you to boldly fulfill the call of God in your life. This week, find one person your world is walking past and do one costly thing for them. Not convenient, costly. Ask God, "Is this the field you're building me for?" Albert Shelton dreamed of India and died on his way to Lhasa. His orphan son preached his funeral. What if your most frustrating redirection is God's most precise appointment? What if a young Scottish aristocrat who gave up Cambridge and died alone in an Arabian desert tent had already proved it? Check out this next video to discover the life of Ion Keith Falconer, the price he paid and the conviction that will change how you respond the next time God calls you somewhere that makes no earthly sense.